Thanks, guys, for that first carrier update. Now let's take y'all to our first live guest of the day. We've got John Kingston on the line, and he put it best to me and Anthony Smith earlier last week. His focus was all Colonial Pipeline all the time last weekend. It might kind of be old news now that the pipeline's back online, but the impacts are still rolling in. John, thank you for joining us today. How's it going? How was your weekend? Are you still focused on what happened with the pipeline?
Well, my weekend was great. The Islanders beat the Penguins in overtime, so they were up 1-0. So that really made the whole weekend for me. I know what you just said about the Colonial Pipeline being kind of a dead story is really mostly true in terms of diesel. Last week, looking at there were three good public sources of big diesel retailers that I kept my eye on. Love's on their website would regularly put up a statement of Love's outlets that were out of fuel. Same thing with Pilot Flying J and Racetrack. They have 751 stores. I didn't realize it was that many. They had a really good database of that. Those numbers are way, way down. I think Love's, as of this morning, had no outlets, which lacked diesel. Pilot Flying J had 2. Racetrack's still a little slower, but you know what? The Racetrack, a lot of those outlets are, in town, and they're probably not fueling a lot of big rigs, so it's not that big a deal. I think there were two things that came out of this that are sort of long lasting. Number one, I would say that everybody in the trucking industry and really the transportation industry that really wasn't aware of the Colonial Pipeline are very aware of it now. And certainly they understand the importance of this. They also understand that while it may go from the Gulf Coast all the way up to the New York area, the impact of an outage really is not in the New York area or Washington, because those areas can be resupplied by other sources like imports. Certainly, anything radiating out of Atlanta had a lot of trouble. I think the other big thing that happened was about 3 weeks ago or so, the National Tank Carriers Association, Tank Truck Carriers Association, put out a statement about the driver squeeze. And they said, we're always fundamentally short in this business. I don't hold me to these numbers, but I think they said, we felt we were about 15,000 drivers structurally short. Now we think we're around 25 or 30,000. And this really, it's almost like the timing was impeccable, because one of the things that really came out of last week was the lack of drivers to take fuel from the big distribution centers along the pipeline, like in a place like Atlanta, to put on a tank truck and then move out to the outlets because they didn't have the drivers. Now, we talked a lot here at FreightWaves on all sorts of mediums about the driver squeeze, but we tend to focus a lot in on the dry van squeeze, the long mileage over the road drivers. But the guys driving the tank trucks are not going long miles. Everybody says, well, it's tough. It's tough to get drivers because they want to be home at night. The tank truck drivers are almost inevitably home at night. And so they're having a squeeze too, and you really saw it. I know that there were some people were saying, look, our inventories at the wholesale facilities are pretty good, but we can't get the trucks to take the fuel from the facilities out to the stations. I think that was one of the big, maybe unexpected impacts from this, that it really shone a light on that part of the business.
So, John, if you're involved in the transportation logistics industry, you know when these type of disruption events happen not to panic. But if you're part of that Gen Pop who really has no idea what the Colonial Pipeline is, other than you're hearing on social media, oh my gosh, there's no gas coming through this pipeline, like the world is ending. What type of role do you think that social media played in the misinformation and leading to the panic that we saw really from the Southeast, like Louisiana, all the way up through those middle East Coast states?
Well, I'm going to take a completely contrarian view. And I don't view taking your car out to a gas station when you hear about a big outage like Colonial Pipeline and filling up, I don't view that as being irrational. Quite frankly, I think it's economically very rational. Now, does it have a lot of negative impacts? Certainly. But, all you're really doing, it's not like you have to make a major investment out of your life savings. All you're really doing is pulling forward some purchases that you might have made 5 or 6 days ago. If you don't do that because you're a good citizen and you run out of gas and you can't go to work or you can't do what you want to do and the tanks are not refilled, well, it's not like you get a good conduct medal for that. So quite frankly, to me, I understand why our national leaders said, don't panic, don't rush out, don't fill up. But it is economically illogical to not do that. And I will tell you right now, I did it and I told my family members to do it too. So shoot me.
There you go.
So, John Kingston, I love this view. I mean, I'm also a skeptic, but I love your contrarian view. So this is obviously a one-time thing or not even a precedented thing. Do you think there's a precedent for this to happen again to another pipeline or anything like that?
Well, I think last week on this show I talked about the fact that I had covered and interviewed the CEO of Forward Air, which had been hit with cyber attack, and I think a lot of things are similar here. Number one, if you ask Forward Air, did you pay a ransom? They won't tell you. If you ask Colonial, did you pay a ransom? They won't tell you. I mean, the reporting is that they did. The number I saw was that Colonial generates about $4 million a day in pipeline revenues. They paid a ransom of $5 million. Economically, back to our economics discussion, that seems like a no-brainer. Now, are there obviously fallout from that because you sort of encourage that behavior? I think that the level of cyber attacks in this country, many of which you don't hear about, are probably high enough that you don't need to incentivize people. The incentive is already there. So I think you can assume that this is not the last. It's going to be on everybody. It's going to be on pipelines. It's going to be on hospitals. It's going to be on small operations. And no, I really question whether anybody is chincing on their spending for cybersecurity. I think anybody who is having a low level of spending now, they've seen the light and they're probably ramping up that budget. So this is not solvable. This is going to go on for a long time. It's going to be a constant cat and mouse battle.
I feel like we should rename this segment Hot Takes with John Kingston, because I've got another one for you. So last week we talked about a group that came out and claimed some responsibility for the hack and said, we feel a little bit bad. There's a little bit of sadness, a little bit of remorse for the situation that they put the United States in. What do you think about a hacking group coming out and almost kind of admitting to their wrongdoing or trying to take the blame by saying that they feel that remorse?
It is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard of. These groups are usually so secretive. I'm sure if you ever had Nate Tabak, my colleague, on, he would tell you about it. And then they say a couple of days later, we're disbanding. Who announces a criminal enterprise announcing they're disbanding? The Gambino family has decided it's no longer going to continue to extort. It's just crazy. I just laughed all week when I saw these things.
It's great.
So it's almost like crime just isn't the same anymore.
No, it just is.
In the age of digital, you're going to get caught anyways, so might as well tell people that you were in it instead of just being caught surprised, right?
I mean, you got to have your morals. You got to draw the line somewhere. So, John, when we saw those prices kind of inch up throughout the Southeast, especially where we saw these outages, that wasn't exactly long-lasting. Do you think some retailers are going to kind of have these elevated prices for a little bit of time to come, or do you think it's going to slowly kind of trickle back down to where they were?
Well, of course, it depends on the overall price of gasoline. The market prices, the commodity prices, et cetera, they really did not rise in relation to this because, Anthony, you're an economist. It'd be interesting. How do you model something like this? It's easy to say, oh, the price should go up. Well, if the buyers can't buy, then how can the price go up? But as I think I mentioned last week, the price at the pump is set by the retailers. It is not set by the oil companies. If you go past an Exxon station and the price is really, really high, that's not Exxon's fault. That's not their decision. The last place in the supply chain that they set the price is the wholesale level. The retailer after that is pretty much on their own. If they go crazy, they may get a nasty phone call from Exxon to tell them to chill it, to stop it. But there's no doubt about it that I think some retailers definitely took advantage of the situation and raised prices, which, again, let's go back to our contrarian economic views. There was a lot of hoarding, and probably the fastest way of ending that hoarding would have been to jack up the price. Not everybody would have gone out and filled, all 4 family cars, maybe their big SUVs to the brim. But the pricing mechanism really wasn't allowed to be used. People were worried about being made an example of in some kind of price gouging prosecution. Nobody wants that. So, there were definitely some increases. From what I saw, they weren't excessive. Really, the kind of ones that raise your eyebrows on. I think I saw one that was $7. I don't know what was going on there. Nobody's going to pay that, obviously. So, and it'll probably drift down. And now I think on the oil side, we'll just get back to the global supply-demand issue, and we'll get back to the issue of the fact that all commodities, lumber, copper, agriculture commodities, et cetera, have all been on quite a bull run. Oil actually has lagged some of those. It has not been the leader. So, I'd say that the Colonial incident is out of the pricing arena, and now we'll just watch and see how it goes.
So what about for those producers who maybe had to hold on to some of their product because they couldn't ship it out through the pipeline? Are they now sitting on a little bit of a stockpile, or were they just kind of unaffected? Was this like a little blip on their radar for them folks down in Texas?
We had what would an economist would call a huge shift in inventories from secondary sources to tertiary sources. The tertiary sources would be the gas tanks. So now those inventories that got drained pretty good when everybody went out and filled up, they have to be refilled. So, if the refiners had some, I mean, first of all, they were ready to cut runs if they needed to. And I don't think they really did. We'll wait and see what the data says. But they'll just ship that up the pipeline, and that'll refill some of the inventories that were drained. You ultimately didn't have much of a. I'm guessing you didn't have much of a decrease in demand. It was interesting to hear Zach say Atlanta had been on a downturn in the OTVI, and I wonder how many. Actually, I would have been driven it up. I was going to say how many drivers just said, "I'm staying home for a couple of days. I don't want to really go out there if I can't be sure of my diesel supplies." Of course, that would drive capacity up, drive capacity tighter. But I don't think it's going to be an issue, any kind of a big stockpile you have to work off. Ultimately, this didn't last all that long. It went down on Wednesday. They started to return on Wednesday. No, excuse me, it went down on Friday, a week ago Friday. They started to return on Wednesday, I think, which kind of shocked everybody. And then by Thursday, they came out with an announcement about 4 o'clock in the afternoon saying, we're operating full.
Yep.
So my hot take is that there's going to be a bunch of people that spent money on gas that really wasn't compatible with their car. So maybe they didn't have unleaded, so they went with diesel or E85. And now we're going to have a spike in cars with messed up engines.
You know what? I don't know if this is still the case, but when diesel first started making its way to the pumps, the nozzle is different size. So I'm guessing this is still the same, but you can't. I don't think you can get a diesel nozzle in a car. If it's not a diesel car, if it's a gasoline car, I do not know if a diesel nozzle goes in.
Well,
somebody check me on.
Might fill it up with a grocery bag.
With a grocery bag instead. Hot Takes with John Kingston. He's going to be one of our weekly guests here on Monday mornings. So hopefully this week goes a little bit smoother. John, thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next week.